Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of February. February was a short month, but it felt so very long. It feels like so much happened in February. I started my month off with a trip to Tokyo, which feels like it was so long ago now. I can't believe it was just a couple weeks ago. That was my first time going to Japan, and it was just so wonderful. It was so much even better than I thought that it would be. We were in Tokyo the whole time. We did go a little bit outside of Tokyo, but for the most part we were right there in Tokyo. I was there for a week. I did a lot of walking. I saw a lot of things. I ate a lot of food. I had a lot of fun. And I just really liked the culture there. It felt like everything was so clean. Everyone was so quiet and respectful of their space and the space around others. That might be in part because it's sort of the off season there now since it's February. It was so cold the whole time, but I'd rather be cold than sweating while traveling. So that part was fine. So I think that was actually a really good time to go because nothing was too crowded. It was just a really nice experience. You'd be like in the middle of a city and you turn down one road and suddenly it's like really quiet residential area. I ended up making my way out to the beach there, which was cool too. Overall, it was just a really, really great trip, a great way to start the month. I still ended up getting quite a bit of reading done this month as well. Similar to January, I read 8 books and my average rating was a little bit better than it was in January with an average rating of 3.25. I did not have any books that I disliked this month. I had a couple books that I DNF'd, a lot of books that I gave 3 stars, a couple books I gave 4 stars, and unfortunately no 5 stars, but everything that I read this month was just a good time. So I'm excited to jump in and tell you about all the books. Starting with the 3 books that I DNF'd. The first one is Witness 8 by Steve Kavanaugh. I had an arc of this from the publisher and I was actually planning on doing a reading vlog of this book and another book that I talk about later, but because I DNF'd this, I just scrapped the reading vlog altogether. This is the same author as Kill for Me, Kill for You, and I really enjoyed that thriller. This book is a part of a series that Steve Kavanaugh has of crime procedurals, and I heard from the publicity person who ended up sending an email out about the arc that you could just jump into this book. You didn't need the context of the other books. And I do think that was true. You can just jump in this book. I wasn't having a difficult time like absorbing the story because I felt like I was missing things. There are a lot of characters and I'm sure many of them had been introduced in the previous parts of the series and are more satisfying to see appear in this book if you know other things about them. But I was just not getting into this book very much at all. Lots of characters, lots of POVs. It's a very gritty crime procedural with like crime bosses and big organized crime going on, that sort of thing, which is not something that I gravitate towards. I don't mind crime procedurals, I don't mind detective stories, but I like them to feel a bit more personal and intimate and small. This felt very big and there were so many different characters to follow. I just wasn't really getting into this one and I decided to set it down. Next is The Tainted Cup, and I was so disappointed to DNF this because this was actually a 5-star prediction for me ever since I first heard about it. It's pitched as this Sherlock Holmes style mystery in a fantasy world. It looked really intriguing. I was hearing amazing things about it. I feel like so many people love this book. I gave it about 100 pages and I just was not getting into it. I actually started this book, read maybe 30 pages, felt like I wanted to DNF it, set it down for about a week, came back to it, tried it again, got to 100 pages, and I just had to accept that this was not for me. I even tried the audiobook. I came at this book from every angle. I was trying everything I could to get into it, and it just was not clicking for me. It was a lot more fantasy world building than I thought it would be, which is fine, but it was kind of like grim, urban, dark in a way that I just wasn't anticipating, and it just wasn't something that I was really getting into. I wasn't in the mood for it. I didn't like the writing style of it very much. So it's a huge disappointment because I thought this was going to be a series I was going to be excited to follow. The next book in the series is coming out soon, but it looks like I can save myself some time and money because it did not work out for me. And the final book I DNF'd this month is The 3 Lives of Kate K. I was listening to this one on audio and I got 50% into the story before I finally decided I just did not care where the story was going to go and I set it down. As I was getting into it, I was looking at reviews to try to see if I should convince myself to read more of it, and I saw people saying it gets better around the 30 to 35% mark, so that's why I kept trying for so long and even got all the way to the 50% mark, and then I just said, this is not working out. I just am not that interested in the story. This is a literary fiction story about this author, Kate K. That is a pseudonym and no one knows who she really is. She has reinvented herself and taken on this fake name because of something that happened in her past that she's running away from. And the story is told to you as her memoir, as she's like telling the story of her life and how she got to where she is today. And then she also invites people who were in her life to write pieces of it from their perspectives as well. So you get multiple POVs in this, but it's all about her and how they affected her and parts of her story. I thought there was going to be a bigger surprise to be had in this based on that synopsis, but it just kind of tells you what happens. Like you see what happens, what she's running away from. It just felt like, you know, all the pieces were right there. And so I didn't have any element of intrigue keeping me interested to see what was going to happen, how everything was going to resolve itself. It's a reflective story. It gets compared to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is a pretty decent comp title. I don't know. I just was not into it. And now getting into all the books that I did complete, I usually go in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. I have so many 3 stars this month and I can't really stack rank and rate them. Generally, it's kind of going in the order, but it's not as particular as it is at other times. So I'm just going to kind of go in a general order. So starting with Little Mysteries by Sarah Gran. This is a collection of 9 little mysteries. And I had this as an ARC from the publisher. So I was reading this in ebook format. There's some cool things about this collection. I think like the first page in it was, I can't remember what you call it, but you know, the fortune teller things, like you fold up a piece of paper and then you can like write things and you do the certain numbers and then that's how you get your fortune. It was shaped like that, so you could theoretically cut it out and fold it and make one of those if you had the physical copy. So there are some cool quirks like that and cool quirks in the storytelling. There's a choose your own adventure story in here. I read this over a long period of time. I started this on my plane ride to Japan. I didn't read a ton of it then, and then I finished it on my plane ride back a week later. So over a span of a week, I was reading these 9 separate stories, and they actually all intertwine and kind of tell a bigger story. And I feel like I missed a little bit of the impact of that because of how I spread it out over time, which is why this is the first book I'm talking about. It kind of resonated with me the least. It made the least impact, but I did really like the writing of each story. There's something about Sarah Gran's writing style that I just really enjoy. I previously read from her the book of The Most Precious Substance. That's the only other thing that I've read from Sarah Gran, maybe a short story here or there in a collection. This is very different from that in subject matter and in tone, but the writing style is very familiar. Like it feels like her writing, and I really liked that. There were also some quirky concepts in here, which kind of remind me of like the book of The Most Precious Substance and the quirky elements in that. So I'm definitely interested in keeping up with Sarah Gran's writing. I want to read more from her. This was okay for me, but I do feel like I kind of messed myself up on the reading experience. So if you plan on picking this up, I would recommend trying to read it more like a novel than like separating all the 9 stories out. My next 3 star is The Housekeeper and the Professor. This has been on my shelves for so many years, and my February TBR jar is what inspired me to pick it up and actually get around to reading it finally. I had a pretty high level of expectations for this, I think, just in my mind, because I haven't heard many people talk about it, but when they did, people really loved this. And there's something about a book like that I just always assume is going to be this hidden gem. It's not ultra popular, it's not being talked about all the time, so I'm really gonna love it, and it's gonna resonate with me in a different way than all the other popular stuff in the moment is, just because it's been sitting on my shelf and there's this magical thing of like, oh, I'll finally pick it up and I'm gonna love it. I think I build that up in my head a little bit. That does happen at times. It didn't happen with this. I thought this story was okay. In the story, you're following a housekeeper who is working for a professor. This is an older man who has encountered some brain trauma, and so now he has memory issues where his memory only lasts for 80 minutes at a time. So every 80 minutes he's forgetting who the people around him are if he didn't know them before his accident. He's gone through a lot of housekeepers. This housekeeper that's coming in is like his 9th or his 10th, and she starts working with him, getting to know him, coming to appreciate him, and she ends up bringing her son around on the job as well. And the story is just about the human connections that they form throughout the story, and kind of exploring this thought of like, how can you become a friend to someone whose memory only lasts 80 minutes? How can you form a connection with someone whose memory only lasts that long? The characters go unnamed in the story as well. The professor is just the professor, the housekeeper is the housekeeper, and then her son, the professor, notices that he has a very flat head, and he says it looks like the square root symbol, and so he calls him Root, and so he goes by Root throughout the story. The professor was a professor of mathematics, and so he is very into math. There's a lot of math in this book. He kind of understands the world through numbers. That's how he connects with people. That's how he communicates with them. When he meets her every morning, he'll ask her when her birthday is, and then then go into this whole thing about what kind of number that is, and he'll talk about prime numbers and perfect numbers and all of these things, these concepts that I wasn't even aware of before going into this book. In the beginning, I was following that and I would read every single detail about the math and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And then I kind of realized it didn't play the biggest importance factor in the story for you to understand the concept of every single thing that they were talking about in math. It was just like sometimes metaphorically connected to what was going on in the story, oftentimes just something that he was kind of going on a tangent about. So I got less concerned with trying to learn the new concepts as I went on in the story, and I realized that was just something he was interested in. He's also really interested in baseball and baseball cards. There's like a lot of talk about that towards the end of the story. Altogether, I thought this book was okay. I liked the writing style of it. This is, I think, my first book from this author, but I know she also wrote The Memory Police, which I'm planning on reading in March, so I'll be interested to see how the books compare. The story is also set in Tokyo, and I read this after having gone to Tokyo, so then there were some things that were a little bit familiar to me, so that was really cool. I think the timing of reading this was just right for that. Maybe it was meant to be all along, but the story just didn't have like a deep emotional impact that I was looking for. It's kind of just a slice of life story following these characters through some time working together. I think I was expecting a gut punch at some point, and I never really got that, so it was okay. It was a fine time. It was a 3-star. Next is The Crash by Freida McFadden. I ended up doing a reading vlog dedicated to this book, so you can check that out if you want to see my full thoughts and experience, hear about spoilers, and hear me really dig into my full review of this book. I'll just give you a quick overview here as to why I gave it a 3-star rating. This is a survival story that is about this pregnant woman who gets stuck in a blizzard. She gets saved by this couple, and then she realizes she is not safe in their home. The beginning of this book was absolutely terrible in terms of the writing style, but I've read a lot of books from Freida McFadden at this point now, so I kind of go in with low expectations, and I wasn't shocked to see that writing style, and it did smooth itself out as the story went along. Having been familiar with a Freida book, I just knew what to expect in this, and it ended up being fine, falling in the middle of the pack of the books that I've read from her so far. I'm also someone who likes a survival story. I like the concept of being snowed in somewhere. I like the concept of not knowing who to trust. So all of those elements worked for me as well. The ending was kind of ridiculous and unbelievable, but that's what you get in a Freida book, so that was that. My next 3-star is Penance. I told you I had a lot of 3 stars. We're still going. This is from the same author as the book Confessions, which I really enjoyed, so I've been excited to check out Penance. This is a story about a group of girls, and one day when they're young and they're playing, this strange man comes up to them, asks one of the girls to go off with him, and then she is found dead. The remaining group of the girls are haunted by this tragedy, and the story follows them many years later, all of their perspectives as you see how their lives have gone on since that tragedy. And the synopsis gives you a little bit more information about what's going on in the story, but I think it's better left to not really know because it kind of takes a bit for that to unfold in the story and for you to realize what the framing device of it is. And I kind of liked just going through it not knowing that, letting that be a little bit mysterious to me, so I won't say much more. There is something about this author's writing style that I find really intriguing. These books just feel unique. It's difficult to compare them to other things. The pacing and the plotting of them is different from what I'm usually reading, and that could be a frustrating experience to some. But I like it. I like the style that she writes her books. She also is difficult to pinpoint a genre on because they're always like dark, psychological, suspenseful. Confessions is about the idea of revenge. This is about the idea of penance, as the title suggests. It feels like she likes to explore the dark places in people's psyche in her writing, and I just find that intriguing to follow along with. So I had a good time with this book. I didn't love it as much as Confessions, but I did still enjoy it, and I still would read more from this author in the future. 2 more 3 stars to go. Next up is Here Beside the Rising Tide. This is an arc that I had, and this is such a funny little book. This is a light, cozy, fantasy, magical feeling, summery read. Your main character is this woman who is an author of these like adventure erotica books. I don't know if they're erotica, but definitely romance. And she's been writing this long series of books, and she's got to work on her next book. She's also going through a divorce from her husband, and she just wants to get away. So she decides to take her 2 children and go off to the beach house and go stay at the beach for the summer, try to work on her book, get away from from her ex-husband, spend some time with her kids. But when she arrives, she is surprised to see a little boy there named Timmy Caruso, who looks exactly like the Timmy Caruso that she was best friends with 30 years ago, who went missing at the beach, has not been seen since, and he looks exactly the same now. So there's been some kind of magical event that has happened because he is here again. And the book follows their summer together and the adventures that are happening. There are creatures and sea monsters, shenanigans. There's a contractor who's helping her work on her late mother's house, and of course he is a sexy contractor, so there's a little bit of a romance element going on there a little bit. It was just kind of like a weird time. It's a weird book. And the ending is really weird. It has this like really cinematic, explosive ending. Excerpts of the books she writes are also embedded throughout the story a little bit in different parts of it. So I don't know, it just felt silly. I feel like silly is kind of the best way to describe this book. And I kind of liked it. It was an easy breezy read. It had a very summery, nostalgic feel to it. I do think the plot structure could have had some tightening up. There wasn't always this feeling of like a through line throughout the novel. You didn't always feel like everything was building on itself and like driving you through conflict and resolution in the most smooth way. But for something just light and brainless, I had a good time with this. And my last 3-star before moving on to the 4 stars is The Last Session by Julia Bartz. Unfortunately, only a 3-star, but a good 3-star. I liked it, but I loved The Writing Retreat when I read that one. That was a 5-star for me. I was really looking forward to another book from this author. And it just didn't quite measure up to The Writing Retreat, but you know, that's okay. I didn't really think it would. These books are very similar. If you've read The Writing Retreat, you'll recognize the style and the tone of Julia Bart's writing in The Last Session. The Writing Retreat has a isolated snowy setting in the winter. The Last Session has an isolated desert setting in the heat of summer. I think there's a lot of similarities in them, structurally, tonally, depending on your interests. Like The Writing Retreat is a lot about toxic female friendships, obsession, writers, books, and then it's all overlaid with that ridiculous over-the-top feel. The Last Session, I don't want to give too much away about it because there is some stuff to be revealed, but generally there's talk of cults, there's talk of the supernatural / spiritual side of things, religious trauma, and a main character who has some dark sexual trauma. If you just put all those buzzwords on a piece of paper and I didn't know anything about the books, I would assume that I would like the one that's like the wintry author retreat whatever setting more than this. So I think just topically it wasn't necessarily things that are my favorite things. But anyway, I enjoyed the book. I still liked it. I just know The Writing Retreat was very hit or miss for people, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to be wondering if they should pick this book up or not based on whether they loved or hated it, and that's the best way I can kind of think to give you an explanation of if you might like it or not. Like if the problems you had with The Writing Retreat were the tone of it, this has a pretty similar tone, so you probably won't like it. If you like the tone, you'll probably like the tone. What I like about the tone of Julia Bartz's stories is that ridiculous edge that she has, where the book just feels like it could really go anywhere. Like it has this over-the-top quality to it, so it really leans into like, I don't know, anything could be possible. For all I know, an alien could drop from the sky on the next page and that could completely turn the story in a different direction, you know? I find that refreshing in thrillers because so many thrillers have just started to read the same to me just because I've read so many. I've seen the same surprises, I've seen the same twists, I've seen the same plot beats. So to be reading a thriller and truly feel like I don't know exactly where this is gonna go is a pretty good time for me. What I didn't love about this book as much is I do feel like it was too slow burn. This was really dragged out and I think the pacing could have been sped up a bit. The ending definitely does get crazy, but it lacked a little bit of that like packing a punch at the end for me, probably because the pacing felt a little bit off. Been waiting for so long for things to happen and then get it all shoved towards the end. I think part of the enjoyment in the story also needs you to suspend your disbelief a bit and just buy into the possibility of the ridiculousness, which I had no problem doing in this story. I was ready, I was there. That's what I would recommend to readers. Just be ready, just be there, just lean into the ridiculousness and you're probably gonna have a better time. So all in all, I liked it, did not love it, but I will definitely still be looking out for the next book from Julia Bartz. And lastly, I had 2 4-star reads No 5 stars this month. Looking back at these, it feels like they could be 5 stars now, just in comparison to everything else I read this month, but they didn't feel like true 5 stars at the time, so I'm gonna stay true to that 4-star rating. First up, I read Deepened by Ali Hazelwood. I listened to this one on audio, and I had a good time with this. My history with Ali Hazelwood. I have read The Love Hypothesis. I gave that a 3-star. I read Bride. I gave that a 4-star. And now I have read The Deepened, and I'm giving this a 4-star. I don't always think of Ali Hazelwood as one of my favorite romance writers, and I guess she's not because I haven't given a 5-star to anything she's written yet, but I'm having a consistently good experience with her books, so I do think I'll be picking her books up more frequently, and I'm very excited to see that Mate was recently announced, the follow-up book to Bride. I think that'll be a really fun time. All that to say, I'm not intimately familiar with Ali Hazelwood's writing style and all the lore behind her works, but from my understanding, this is a more spicy book than maybe she's written in the past. This is a story about the exploration of kink between 2 college athletes, a swimmer and a diver. The setup is interesting. It's interesting how they come across one another. So the diver is a woman and she is on the diving team. One of her teammates, a fellow diver, is dating this guy Lucas, who is a swimmer. At the beginning of the book, they are breaking up, and the one who is dating him, Penn, is talking to your main character Scarlett about the nature of their breakup, and they're having difficulties with incompatibilities in their sexual preferences. He's into more kinky things, she is not, and she feels like they should break up because it's just not gonna work out. They've been together a long time. She wants to explore different things. She thinks he should explore different things. And Scarlett at first tells Penn like, oh, I'm also into kinky things. Like, you want to just talk about it a little bit? Maybe you could be into it, is kind of the framing of the discussion, I guess. She's just trying to like bond with her and connect with her in this moment. Like, oh no, like, you know, it doesn't have to be this big scary thing, and you know, it's not as taboo as you might think. Like, I'm into it too. Anyway, Penn and Lucas break up, and then Penn is drunk and she brings Lucas and Scarlett together and is like, I think you guys should hook up because you have the same sexual preferences. And that's where the story begins. And so they do get brought together and they explore their sexual preferences together. I wasn't sure what to expect in the progression of the story, if this would be truly just a relationship that was sexual in nature or if there would be an emotional connection forming between them. And I was pleased that it did follow the path of having an emotional connection forming between them. Gave the story a little more depth, made them feel a little bit more human. So I enjoyed that. I do feel like, and this is not necessarily a criticism because I wasn't going into this book with many expectations, I just wanted to see what it was like. I feel like there was more talk about the kink than exploration of the kink, which is fine. It just like, I thought it was setting itself up to maybe be a little bit more than it was, but I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching these 2 characters come together, being vulnerable with one another, having fun with one another, going through difficult conversations with one another. Also a little bit of a taboo element because it's her teammate's ex-boyfriend, and I don't know, that just added fun tension to the story. Also, he's Swedish, and in the audiobook, there is a male narrator with an accent. So I recommend the audiobook for sure. I thought the audiobook was just fun, and overall the book was just a fun time. The reason why it didn't feel like a full 5-star to me, sometimes the book felt a little bit imbalanced, which I feel like is maybe what I thought about The Love Hypothesis. That was so long ago that I read that I can't fully remember what I didn't love about that one, but there's elements of STEM in this. Ali Hazelwood likes to write about characters in STEM. So the main character wants to be a doctor. They're both in biology. They're working in biology together. They're talking about their experiments. So that takes up some of the story. She's got her own personal traumas that she's dealing with after recovering from an injury. She's working with a therapist on that. So that's taking up some of the story. There's the stuff going on with her team, the competitions that she's going into, he's going into. He's got some Swedish family stuff going on. There's this other character who comes in later in the story, causing some conflict between some things. So very much elements that are true of a real person's life. Like, people are more than just this one moment in time of things happening to them, but it just made the pacing feel a little bit off in certain times, I guess. Just didn't necessarily give that full 5-star feeling, but it was close. It was a 4. I had a lot of fun with it. And yeah, I think I'm gonna be reading more Allie Hazelwood. And lastly, my other 4-star was The Examiner by Janice Hallett. I have read everything Janice Hallett has written now. I've gotten through her full backlist, and I really enjoy her as an author. I think she is doing really cool stuff in her stories. She writes mysteries that are told in the mixed media format, so her stories are composed of emails, text messages, letters, anything different from the typical prose to build the story of a mystery. And so it usually feels like you're an outsider kind of looking through all these documents, piecing together what might have happened rather than following a story while it's happening. This story is following a group of students who are taking a master's course in this arts class. The arts class is supposed to be about like doing art in a way that can set you up for a real life job in the corporate world. And it's a pretty small class. I think there's only 6 students in it. And the framing of the story is that there is an external course examiner who will be looking over all the work and grading it so that they have more fair grades. This is probably a thing that's common in the UK. I don't know that we really do this in America. But anyway, the examiner is pulling all this together, going through all this documentation because they are going to be grading things. And they're communicating with the other course examiners and saying it seems like something went wrong in this class and they're suspicious that something happened. Maybe someone went missing, maybe something worse. And so that's how the story kicks off. You don't know what went wrong. You just know that something probably did. And then you're looking back through all of this documentation of their time in the course. So the first part of the story is just the setup and trying to figure out what is the mystery, what is going on here, and then, you know, you figure out what's going on. I do still think my favorite Janice Hallett is probably The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels, which is in part because it was the first book I read from her, so it was my first time seeing what a masterpiece she could create, but also I think that was just such a complex, nuanced work in the way that it all came together. This was also great, but I do think it was a little bit slow. It dragged on a little bit and was repetitive for a bit of time. I think it could have been edited down a bit. It's almost 500 pages, which it does read very fast because, you know, it's mixed media elements, so the pages aren't always full with a ton of text. There's text messages and emails and stuff that makes the pages flip faster. But the beginning portion of the setup, I feel like they probably could have just trimmed some stuff out of that. I did like where the mystery went. I found it to be very twisty, very engaging, very surprising, also complex, and it also leverages the mixed media format in a way to build on the mystery, which I like when Janice Hallett does that. I do think it could have done a little bit more with the art element of the story because they're in an art class, they're submitting all this artwork, they're even doing like soundscapes and playing with sound, and I feel like they should have just done a little bit more with that maybe. I don't know that we needed a ton of illustrations or, you know, QR codes to MP3 files that we can listen to, but they could have done a little bit of that. That would have been interesting to see as well. But anyways, I really did enjoy this for the most part. I really liked the mystery. I was very surprised at the direction it went. It definitely pulled off some twists. It was just a really fast, engaging read for me to get through. There's something about her books that I just really get so pulled into them and read them so quickly. And they're just a really good pick-me-up. I can always guarantee on a Janice Hallett book to be a good time. So that's it for all the books I read this month. Let me know down below in the comments if you've read any of them and what you think, or let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!